In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw a rooster using soft pastels. We'll start with a light sketch on toned Canson Mi-Teintes pastel paper. I'm using the smoother side of the paper. I've used a white pastel pencil to loosely sketch out the contours of our rooster. Then we can begin adding colors to the background. We'll start with a light blue. Many of the colors in the rooster are red and yellows and oranges, so I want the colors of the background to contrast these colors. I'll add a bit of blue-green to the background as well. For the lower portion of the background, a bit of darker blue is added so that the value is slightly darker. Then we can start adding some of the base colors to the rooster. We'll start with the top portion. We'll cover the entire portion of the comb, which is the upper portion, the areas around the eye, and even the wattle, which is the part that dangles down underneath the beak, with this color. It's a deeper red. Then we'll use our finger to blend this application into the tooth of the paper. A cream pastel is used to fill in the rest of the body. And then here again, we'll gently blend this application with our finger. This same color is also used to fill in the shape of the beak. A small white shape exists just underneath the eye, so a white pastel is used to fill in this shape. We'll add a few bits of color to the body. Here, yellow ochre is used, and a bit of orange. Now that we've established some of the base colors, we can go in and start developing the details. This time, we'll switch over to a pastel pencil, and I'm using black here. I'm going to define some of the shadows that exist in the comb. Over the top, I'll use a red pastel to smooth transitions from midtones to darker values. A variety of reds are used here. The red I'm using at this point is quite a bit brighter. We'll also highlight a few areas with a bit of orange to add a bit of variety to the color. One of the wonderful things about working with pastels is we can start very loose. After applying our base colors, we can slowly develop the details on top. Now we can start developing some of the highlights that exist and some of the texture of the comb as well. Our light source is originating from the right side of the scene. This means most of the highlights are going to exist on the right side of the comb, while the shadows will exist on the left side. As we're adding these marks that indicate the highlights, we're also cognizant of the fact that the marks need to reflect the texture of this portion of the rooster. The majority of the comb is quite bumpy in texture, so small dots are applied here. We'll also vary the intensity, allowing some of the dots to be a bit stronger. We can tone down areas with another application of the red, and strengthen areas with a white pastel. Now we'll add a bit of pop of color up here as well, and we'll add a light pink initially. This bit of color will make the colors a bit stronger and a bit more bright and vibrant. Now we'll move on to the beak. At the very end of the beak, there's a touch of blue, so we'll start with a little bit of blue. We'll darken up the shadow with a black pastel pencil. We can also define the line that exists between the top portion of the beak and the bottom portion of the beak. We'll continue layering in some of the shadows with the black pastel pencil. Rarely will you need to use a black on its own. Typically, you'll want to mix a black so it appears more natural. We'll go back at a later stage and tone down some of the black. You can see how strong it is and how much it contrasts the colors around it. We'll start with a light gray pastel pencil, and then a light blue to add a few highlights to the end of the beak. We're allowing these marks to overlap some of the dark marks made with the black pastel pencil. We'll add a bit of burnt sienna, and a bit of orange as well. A bit of red violet exists in the beak as well, so a pastel pencil is used to apply this color. We'll tone down some of the colors with an additional application of the light gray. Then we can go over the top of some of the strong blacks that we created with the pastel pencil, this time with a bit of yellow-orange, and then we'll add a few highlights with a white pastel pencil. We'll darken up some of the imperfections on the beak with a burnt umber. Then we'll move our attention to the eye. We'll start by addressing the darkest areas in and around the eye with a black pastel pencil. As we do so, we're careful to leave an area for a highlight which we address with a white pastel pencil. We'll add a few oranges and a touch of burnt sienna to the eye to make the red stand out a bit against the red around it. Then we'll add a few more highlights with the white pastel pencil. We can also lighten up some of the areas around the eye with a white pastel pencil before addressing some of the reds over the top. We'll also use this red to go over some of the darker areas on the bottom portion of the wattle, toning down the black. For a bit of color in the shadowed areas, we'll add a bit of purple. Then over the top, we'll make strokes with the black pastel pencil that mimic the directional strokes of the hairs that are growing around the eye. We'll darken up some of the shadows around the eye with black pastel pencil and some of the areas outside of the eye as well. And then we can go back with the red pastel pencil, toning down the black. After the darker values have been toned down with the red pastel, I see that the shadows at the bottom portion need to be strengthened a bit, so an additional application of the black pastel pencil is applied and gently blended with a finger. We'll also add a few additional shadows to the wattle and continue the process of toning down the contrast with additional applications of the red. Then over the top, it's time to add a few indications of hairs. We'll use a light peach color initially, pulling strokes in the direction that these small hairs are growing. We'll have a bit of variety in the intensity of these marks as well, allowing them to be weaker lower in the wattle. Then over the top, we'll use a white pastel pencil to strengthen up some of the highlights and make some of the hairs stand out a bit more. We'll also add a few additional highlights around the eye. Then with a yellow ochre pastel pencil, we'll add a few strokes to the area around the eye. And with the cream pastel, we'll strengthen up some of the lighter values. We'll also pull a few strokes overlapping the comb. Now we'll add our purple to some of the shadowed areas on the lower portion of the wattle. And for consistency, we'll add our light pink for the highlighted areas. Since the wattle overlaps the body, we'll next turn our attention to this section. We'll first add a bit of orange and blend it in gently with our finger. Then a bit of yellow is added. In this case, it's yellow ochre. We'll use the cream to indicate some of the highlights, again on the right side of the body. And then we'll use burnt umber to establish some of the shadowed areas. These applications are then gently blended with a finger. We'll continue applying a bit of orange, yellow ochre, and a touch of cream in areas. To strengthen the highlights on the right side of the body, we'll add a touch of white. With a light brown pastel pencil, we'll establish some of the details of the feathers, although these details will still remain relatively loose. We want the focus of this image to be on the head and the eyes. In the shadowed areas, we'll add a touch of blue, and gently blend it in with our finger. To strengthen the shadows, we'll return with the black pastel pencil. These shadows are strongest just underneath the wattle and right down the center of the breast. We'll pull strokes generally in the direction that the feathers are growing. You can really see here how strong the black is. We'll tone it down in a moment. We'll add a pop of color with some brighter yellow, and then a bit more applications of the orange. A lighter peach pastel pencil is used to pull out some additional highlights in the feathers. Again, these details are very loose. We're not going to be concerned with each individual feather. A cream pastel is used to create a few additional highlights. And then it's back with the orange. We'll add a slight indication of purple overlapping our strong blacks. And then we'll strengthen up the highlights again with a white pastel pencil. A few more additional feathers are indicated with a light cream. Now it's time to address the details of the wattle. We'll start with the black pastel pencil, strengthening up some of the shadows. And then, as we have in other sections, we'll go over the top with a red pastel pencil, toning down the strength of the black. This will still create darker values, it just won't be so strong with the contrast. We'll add a few of the details on the right side of the wattle with the black pastel pencil. And continue strengthening the shadows on the left side of the wattle. And then again, additional applications are made with the red pastel pencil. We'll add highlights with a white pastel pencil, again considering the texture of this section. Small dots are made of varying intensities. We'll add stronger highlights to various locations, and then weaker ones. Then over the top with a red pastel pencil, we can adjust the intensities of some of these values. Now we'll finish up the background. With a light blue pastel, I'll make several loose marks using the side of the pastel and gently blend it with my finger, allowing some of the texture to still show through. On the lower portion, we'll return with our blue-green, darkening up some of the values and intensifying some of the colors underneath. We'll use our finger to gently blend a transition from the lighter blues to the darker blue-greens. Then, with the light blue pastel, we'll add a few textural marks in this transition area. For a few additional pops of color, we'll return with the purple, strengthening up some of the shadows. We'll also use the blue to add a few pops of color in areas of shadow on the wattle. And now our pastel drawing of a rooster is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then why not subscribe to the channel? And if you're ready to learn even more about drawing and painting, then why not check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just click on the button in the center of your screen or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you so much for watching.